unmute.
All right. Well, welcome to the Davey Resource Group quarterly webinar series. Today we'll be talking about the Urban Forestry Program Continuum. And I'm just going to give everybody one more minute to go ahead and sign in and get comfortable, maybe get a glass of water and get ready. So, all right, so we'll be starting in less than a minute. Thank you very much. All right, well, I think it's time to go ahead and get started. So I want to respect everybody's time, and I appreciate your attending this webinar. I know webinars are not the most exciting element in the world today, but I think they're an effective way to help share some information, hopefully in the comfort of your office or your home or your truck, wherever we find you today. A couple little housekeeping of note is, hopefully it'll take about an hour. There will be a CEU number at the end. I am recording this webinar as well, so if for any reason you have to jump off or you want to share it, I will share the YouTube link and the recording link at the end of the presentation to everybody that registered. So feel free to forward that on, and I look forward to hearing how you've found this webinar useful in your career. Also, if you have any comments or any questions, feel free to use that component of the webinar software, the AnyMeeting software. I'll just chat in something in the chat box or go ahead and ask a question. I'll be trying to stop throughout the presentation every now and then to hear what might have been happening. If you are having any technical issues, please let me know. I'll try to troubleshoot them, but fair warning, I am a forester and not an internet computer person. So also, before we get started, I do want to introduce the idea that we'll have a couple polls throughout the presentation, just to kind of keep you engaged and so I can learn a little bit more about you since I can't see everybody out there. So let's go ahead and start this presentation off with a quick poll question here. So hang on one second. All right, so I'm curious, just who are you? What do you make up? One thing about this Urban Forestry Program Continuum is I think it's pretty adaptable and it's good for a lot of different types of organizations. So let's see where we're at here. A couple more seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close it down. We'll have a couple more later on. And it looks like about 2/3, 3/4 are from municipalities. So that's great. So what is the continuum? The Urban Forestry Program Continuum is simply an infographic that we put together, but that we think about at Davey Tree. As a Davey Resource Group, Davey Tree, one of the things that we're constantly and continually thinking about is how can we help our clients? How can we help the programs and the organizations that we're involved with in doing better and being better and adding more capacity? So we've always kind of thought of it in this sense, and we've had the privilege of working with a lot of different and diverse clients throughout the years. And we've had the opportunity to help shape and promote a lot of programs, but of course, we can only do so much, and it's up to you to take it and to run with it from what you can. So, the idea here is to succinctly show what a program might look like, what your program potentially could look like, and to show the elements of it. A couple things to think about with this is that it should be customizable, it should be adaptable for your current program and your goals of what you have. The idea here is to succinctly show and to demonstrate to elected officials, to maybe program heads, to department heads, to volunteers, what exactly you're trying to accomplish at your job. While you're here, while we have this opportunity, what are we reaching for? What are our goals? What are our milestones that we're really trying to achieve? And I think that if we can succinctly show that and demonstrate that, we can get more people on board, and we can get more capacity to accomplish more. We can hopefully have more resources, which will then feed back in and provide us a better program, an increased program, and set our programs up for better. Why do we want to do that? Well, here at Davie, we intrinsically believe that if we can empower and promote better urban forestry programs, then we'll have a better world and we'll have a better place to live in. As simple and as cheesy as that sounds, that's what I get excited about. That's what I want. I want more trees. Trees are the answer, and we want to help empower you to do that. So let's take a deep run through for it real fast. I think an important component is the Tree City USA. Of course, this one is missing the proclamation, but there's the elements there. An important note on the continuum is this should just be the beginning of your program, really. Unfortunately, a lot of city officials and a lot of departments might think that this is the end, and they really brag about it. We put a lot of signs up, and we get I see tons of news reports and news releases happening right now. So this is just the beginning of a community, and it's just something to springboard off of. Oftentimes, when a community is able to get a Tree City USA and get that free program, it does help to create an opportunity to get a little bit more of a dedicated commitment, to get some sort of buy-in. Usually that's because one of the points of being a Tree City USA is to have an ordinance. An ordinance will usually have some sort of dictation in who is responsible for the urban forest. So by default, someone will become responsible for that. And at that level, when you assign responsibility to someone to maintain and promote and grow the urban forest, then comes that responsibility and that idea of somebody is now responsible for it. Usually when somebody becomes responsible for maintaining something, they have to understand what do they have and what do they need. And they want to do a better job, and they want to do the best job possible. So a common goal becomes doing a tree inventory or a tree assessment and setting some goals along that. Inevitably, when you do a tree inventory or you do a tree assessment of some sort, you're going to find a backlog of work. You're going to find some information out there that you didn't really know about. You're going to find some opportunities maybe to plant some trees or to remove some trees. And hopefully you'll be able to leverage that tree inventory into getting some additional money, maybe get to some sort of proactive maintenance program, create a management plan, set some goals. And then once that starts to happen and you realize, oh man, we're doing a great job, we got our program caught up, we've finally been able to get the dedication, the money, the equipment we needed, it becomes look up a little bit higher level, start looking at the private property, looking at a little longer term, what is our legacy going to be, what are we leaving for the next generation, what do we want our vision to be, what do our homeowners, our residents think about, and we start thinking about maybe creating a master plan of some sorts, getting multiple departments to get on the same level, getting running several scenarios, maybe it's development, maybe it's socioeconomic, setting those longer term goals that we can try to get greater buy-in, have more impact, and leverage even further. But the final element of the continuum that I purposely put into this is the idea that the trees that we're growing and the assets that we're maintaining are continually changing. And with that, our programs and our people should be continually changing. Maybe it started with an ISA certified arborist, and then 5 years ago, ISA came out with the tree risk assessment qualification. Before that, we didn't have a good level, a good base to understand that. So a lot of people went out and got that qualification and feel more confident in tree risk assessments. Our trees are changing. Our programs need to be evolving and changing. We should be communicating that to our elected officials, to our personnel. We should be thinking about what do we need to come back and revisit, and how often and how frequent do we need to revisit that. So some common opportunities to revisit our tree inventory. That data does get out of date. Maybe it's a funding issue. Maybe it's a personnel issue. But having that feedback loop and having that reinspection and that opportunity to reevaluate is a really healthy component to an urban forestry program. Now, I put on here 10-year cycles and 5-year cycles. Of course, those could be impacted by several events that maybe your calendar years are different. Maybe you want to run it on a 7-year cycle or a 3-year cycle. Maybe you've had a personnel change and you have a new opportunity. Maybe you've had a tremendous storm event. Everybody in Florida, their hurricane season can impact their tree inventory and their needs dramatically. Maybe you have an invasive pest like emerald ash borer coming in. Maybe it's a funding issue. Maybe you had some severe cuts and now you need recoup that. Maybe it's political. There's all sorts of opportunities for this cycle to maybe evolve and change. And I think you don't want to get so hard and fast into a calendar year and take advantage of opportunities and capacities as they come up. So that is the overview of the Urban Forestry Program Continuum. I think that it's important to remember that it is, like I said, customizable, and it is just something that we put together to help you, to help us clearly communicate it. So before we get started with the next session here, I want to ask another poll question. And I'm curious to know, what are some of the greater obstacles for growing your program? Is it lack of support? Maybe that's lack of attention from other departments. Maybe that's lack of support because of competing interests. Is it funding? If you had all the money in the world, could you do what you needed to do? That's an easy one that people want to use. Is it capacity? Is it because of the number of people, or is it the training of the people, or the equipment, or the community involvement? Is it a lack of focus? Is it that you're getting pulled in so many directions, you're not able to prioritize the activity you want? I know we all wear a lot of different hats out there every day, and we have to focus and try to do the most with what we can. We're not making any more time, and we're only getting busier. So leave that open for just a couple more seconds. Close this out. And I don't think it's a huge surprise, but it does look like the majority of people feel that it's a lack of funding, a lack of capacity, and then a lack of focus and interest. So thanks a lot for that. And I'm not seeing any questions coming in right now, so that's a good sign. All right. So now that we've done the overview of it, let's dive in a little bit deeper and let's take a look at some communities and some case studies, examples that, just that I know of, just that I'm aware of, and I've had the privilege to be associated with over the past couple years. These are examples of communities that did not simply just check a box and became engaged, stay engaged, and advance their program. So Tree City USA, let's just start at the very basic beginning. Just so everybody knows, Tree City USA is a free program run by the National Arbor Day Foundation, a seminal achievement that a lot of communities really, really look forward to. A lot of city foresters love to be able to tell their mayors and their city managers that they are going to have it again, even though they may not enjoy the paperwork. But it's a free program. I think there's just these 4 standards: tree department, ordinance, proving that you spend some money, and that you have an Arbor Day proclamation or observation. So how can communities leverage this Tree City USA? Well, one of the greatest examples that I know of, and I've had the opportunity to help along the way, is Sedalia, Missouri. Now, I know some people in the audience are from Missouri and are aware of Sedalia, but it's probably not on a lot of people's radars as an urban forestry program. It's not a name that we hear a lot, like a Milwaukee or someone doing something really innovative. It's a town of 22,000 people, really centrally located in Missouri. They do host the Missouri Annual State Fair. Of note, they're pretty proud. They were featured in Rawhide several times. But how did they leverage their Tree City USA status? So around 2010, they had some support in the city and some volunteers that were interested in becoming a Tree City USA. So they did it. They became a Tree City USA. A smaller town, it's pretty easy to move an initiative along pretty quickly. They were able to do that. And I remember attending their second tree board meeting where they were sitting there thinking about, well, what do? We became a Tree City USA. We're now a tree board. What are we supposed to accomplish with our initiative here? And they had a local, state, regional forester, with the Missouri Department of Conservation that attended as well. And we talked to them about, well, why don't you guys do a tree inventory? Why don't you think about what do you have out there in your urban forest? So sure, why not? So we helped them get a grant from the Missouri Department of Conservation, a small $10,000, and they did a park tree inventory and wrote a management plan. Seemingly thought that would be the end of it because this was the Parks Department. The Public Works Department got engaged. They decided they wanted to hear about it more, learn as well. So they started doing street tree inventories. And over the course of about 5 years, they were able to complete multiple phase tree inventory, street tree inventory. They only collected about 1,100 trees a year. That's what their budget could afford. That's what they had the capacity to manage once they had the data. But they were able to continue to keep plugging away at it. This was a way for the tree board to stay engaged. It was a way to keep that information in front of the citizens, to keep information out there so that the department heads, and why they were able to do that, they were able to hire an arborist and get them on staff. So they were able to start implementing the recommendations, doing some training pruning, doing some education of the different public works staff so that when trees were getting planted, they were able to improve mowing operations. And then last year, they were able to start re-inventorying their trees. They had realized they had a tornado that had gone through, and a lot of trees that had a backlog of maintenance were starting to get taken care of. So they were able to start re-inventorying those original park trees. And then, technology had changed, some personnel had changed. So they changed their software as well. They had started with a fixed CD-ROM installed asset manager software just on one computer. And then now, fast forward, they went to the web-based version so that they can get more people engaged and share the information and have live access out in the field. Next year, they're looking at continuing to update their street tree inventory and adding even more capacity by having an on-call arborist and having some consulting services around that for private homeowners. Right now, when a private homeowner calls in and asks a question about a tree, they don't really have a good capacity to respond to it. They don't have enough people. They don't feel comfortable giving information and sharing risk information with homeowners. So that's what they're looking to try to expand into, maybe get a grant for it, or maybe just get a small line item budget so they can start utilizing that without all the expenses of it. So Sedalia was able to take a seemingly simple task of a Tree City USA, and with that, leverage that into a tree inventory ongoing basis over years, and then also leverage that even further into updating their tree inventory. They weren't content to just have a static system, and they weren't content to just let it sit there. They wanted to keep it up to date. They want to keep people engaged, and they want to keep working on it. So now what they're working on is keeping the dedicated commitment. They have a new staff on board. She's dedicated to becoming an ISA certified arborist. She started engaging in the local regional councils, attending the local state meetings, things like that. So, once you have that tree inventory done, how can you leverage that? What can you do with that? Well, just so we're all on the same page, tree inventories, are usually done on public property, usually done along streets and public parks, cemeteries, usually involve some sort of location, species, size, condition, recommended maintenance, maybe it's a risk rating, maybe overhead utilities. I can't imagine an inventory happening these days without GPS component to it. There are still a number of Excel versions out there, still a number of address-based versions out there from a legacy before GIS was so readily available. But in today's day and age, I can't imagine that. And I also can't imagine doing an inventory and not running it through iTree. I can't imagine not sharing the information on the ecosystem services and the benefits that your trees are contributing to the society, to the community that you're managing. When we zoom in, some of the nice things about the web-based versions of tree inventories and having that data is having everything instantly available, let people be able to really see what that data is, sharing that information with your homeowners, engaging it as far as Google Earth and Google Satellite and Google Street View, but allowing you to have access to that information all through the touch of a button. That's really what tree inventories have gone to now. More and more communities are using their tree inventory to track work, to create work orders, to run reports as well, and to manage contractors, to manage projects, and communicate that up to city officials. I think the days of just asking for a 10% budget increase are getting harder and harder to justify. I think having more line item, more justification behind your asks is really the future. And I see a lot of communities having success with that. If you can say down to the dollar level of what you need and why you need it and what work you're going to perform with that, I think you have a much better case and you have a stronger defense. And if they need to do a budget cut, I would ask, what do you want me to cut? Do you want me to not do the 2 high-risk removals? Would you rather me not do a yearly tree pruning program? Would you, ask, if they ask for budget cuts, ask them for guidance on which services you should not provide. I think that's a good cover your own end, and also to flip it back onto them and really demonstrate why you need that money and why you need to implement it. So how can you leverage a tree inventory? Unfortunately, I see a lot of communities do a tree inventory and it just sits on the shelf somewhere, or it sits in a filing cabinet, or it sits in a computer desk somewhere. I think Pittsburgh is a seminal example, a great example of how they were able to leverage a tree inventory. Really it kind of starts before this timeline here. In 1995, Carnegie Mellon released a report detailing the state of Pittsburgh's urban forestry program, and city council, didn't view that too favorably, so they reacted by creating a shade tree committee, basically their version of a tree board, and that committee worked for about 10 years trying to get some support, trying to get some focus, get direction, and get ultimately funding to do a tree inventory project. Talking to the city forester there, it was a long slog of constant meetings, city not committing, having to get private funding. But once they were finally able to accomplish that, things really took off. So in 2005, they were able to conduct a street tree inventory project. And with that became a huge backlog of maintenance, mainly London plane trees. And the idea that they started to remove them. So they started to actually implement them, started removing them. It kind of got headlines, and a lot of people got upset. That created the opportunity for the nonprofit Tree Pittsburgh to be created. And then a year later, the Tree Pittsburgh was able to have enough money and enough support from the city and private foundations to hire their staff. This is really critical because there's a lot of foundations out there, particularly in Pittsburgh with the Hines family and Carnegie Mellon and places like that. And they care about the urban forest and they care about the maintenance, but they don't want to give the money to the city. They don't seemingly want to just give that to nobody. So by having a nonprofit and having that advocate, they were able to accept that money and to start planning to use it. At that same time, the city was able to hire a new urban forester, and on purpose, they had them built and at that time put into the planning department so it could be a little longer range and have more cooperation. She has since been put back into public works, but it was critical for a while there. After that, Tree Vitalize in the state decided to start planting, and they set a goal of planting 20,000 trees. It became pretty apparent they didn't know where those trees were going to go. They didn't really collect planting sites in the original street tree inventory, and they didn't have a good plan for keeping them alive either. This created the opportunity, the acknowledgement that they needed some sort of master plan. There was now, a city department that was interested. You had planning, you had public works, you have parks, you have a nonprofit created, you have the state. You can imagine there's a lot of different interests and conflicting ideas. So they were able to, in 2012, get one of the best and first urban forestry master plans done. That created funding opportunity and created engagement at a neighborhood level where they were then able to come back and update the street tree inventory. And since then, they've been working to look at some operational reviews, look at efficiencies, and look at ways that they can improve, from mobile technology to routing to systematic scheduling of work. They're also looking at their tree preservation ordinance and trying to figure out how they can retain that, because they just finished an update to the urban tree canopy analysis, and they're in the process of figuring out how that has changed in the 5 years. And that is critical because they found out they've been losing about 1,000 acres of canopy a year. So they're trying, even with all of their planting of 20,000 trees and all the planting and management of with the nonprofit, without tree preservation, they're not going to make their planting, their tree canopy goal. So next, they're working on trying to update that master plan. It's only been 8 years, but a lot has changed. Of note, they did create a nursery along the way, the nonprofit did, and that's been really good for engaging the community. It's been really good to get volunteers out to plant native seeds, as well as to take funders and take city officials on a nice little hike. A question that just came in was, what is UTC? Sorry about that. UTC stands for Urban Tree Canopy Analysis. I'll explain what that is later in the presentation, but it's an urban tree canopy analysis. Another question was, what happened to the 1,100 trees per year in Sedalia? Well, those 1,100 trees per year have been inventoried. That's how many trees are getting added to the inventory every year for funding issues. So they just keep getting aggregated to the original inventory, and they build it up. So they have about 6,000 trees in there now, and just gets added to their routine maintenance. They get a nice little summary report saying what they have and what should happen. All right, so yeah, thank you for asking those questions. If you have any other ones, just keep filing them away. All right, so what has Pittsburgh been able to accomplish since doing their tree inventory? Well, they already had a Tree City USA status. Because of their tree inventory, they were able to check that box, which was able to facilitate a little bit more commitment. They already had some staff, but they're able to get a better commitment from the city as well as a nonprofit, which helped to add more money from funding as far as in the city, as well as foundational funding. That funding and that activity created the opportunity to create a master plan, which then facilitated updating their tree inventory. So some of their future goals now are to update that master plan, to analyze this urban tree canopy analysis, and to see what that change has been for 5 years. They're also interested in understanding how the stakeholders have changed. What has Pittsburgh is a pretty good example of one of these cities that's going through unprecedented growth right now. They have Uber there and they have Google there, and there's a lot of people flocking to that community. So it's interesting to think about in the 8 years since the original master plan, was created. Demographics have changed, people's finances have changed. What does that look like? I think that would be a really interesting component to a new master plan. And maybe that 20-year vision is still valid, maybe it's not. So since we've been talking about master plans, let's dive into a little bit more and see how you could leverage and how you could use a master plan. Just real fast, a master plan is a roadmap, and it's a higher level view of your goals. It usually involves some sort of state of the urban forest, looking at what do we have, and it also involves additional analysis and components. It is not a management plan. Management plans are usually just done on public streets or parks. They're usually pretty short term in their implementation time frame, maybe 5 years, 7 years, depending on funding and the number of trees and your capacity. And of course, they're a lot less expensive. Most management plans are risk-based management plans, whereas most master plans, they take a little bit longer, and they look at, what do we have, what do we want, how are we going to get there, and how are we doing? So using this adaptive management protocol, using different criteria and indicators. The three that we like to look at the most are the trees themselves, the players in the urban forest. So looking at, in Pittsburgh, that'd be the nonprofits, the city departments, the homeowners, the businesses, anybody that's engaged in the urban forest. One other component to the urban forest is this idea of the urban tree canopy analysis. A big difference is urban tree canopy looks at all the cities, all of the trees in the urban canopy, sorry. So you're looking at trees in the private property as well. You're not just looking at trees in the public. And this is real important because it's that satellite view that a lot of people don't really see. In urban forest, every day we drive through, we look at our trees in front of our house, and maybe you look at satellite, but when you show a map like this, you can really get a lot of interest. Usually about 85–90% of the urban forest is on private property. That's where those tree preservation ordinances and those different levels like that of education really come into play. The other thing to think about here is capacity. If a community doesn't have their own house in order and you don't have a good grasp on what your program is and what your milestones are, it might be a little premature to jump up and do an urban tree canopy analysis. If you think about it from this perspective, is if you can't take care of what you have, you're probably stretching to try to take care of somebody else's as well. So doing an urban tree canopy analysis and doing a master plan, I would encourage you to think about the capacity you have to take that on. Not saying you have to have a 100% tree inventory, or not saying you have to have all the milestones ahead of it. I'm just saying to think about that for a minute. Because once you do have an urban tree canopy analysis and you're starting to dive deeper, you can really get a lot of incredible information. In Pittsburgh, they have a strong neighborhood coalition of about 92 neighborhoods. And you can look at that, and you can look at the canopy that's in those neighborhoods and start to think about things like social equity, start to think about available planting locations, thinking about watersheds, council districts. So you can really leverage that information on top of a lot of different information that's already available, or create new ones. When you do this, it's really cool to get some stakeholder input. What the residents are thinking and what they feel, it can be very valuable in that goal setting process of, now we know what we have. We did our urban tree canopy analysis. We did our tree inventories. Well, what do we want? We think we know what we want, but getting that stakeholder input is really critical. And, when you do that, here's something from Tallahassee, Florida that we're working on right now. We have an online website and a survey going out there, along with some public meetings. It's important to share a little information. So here's a quick little analysis we did from the 1954 to 2015 and looking at that canopy change. some of that's because of the quality of the data, and some of that's also because of tree planting efforts and other types of development pressures. So getting that information, again, we wanted on the three main components of the urban forest, which are the trees, the players, and the management. The management being mainly the people on this webinar, for instances, or anybody else that is touching the actual trees. And it's good to get a broad scope of what they're thinking about that. Our consumers or our clients are more informed than ever right now. So that's how an urban forestry management plan can help and what it is. I've seen, and just in my short career here, I've been able to see, communities like Charlotte, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, number out west in California that are using master plans to get additional funding, to change the attitude of their program, which can help with dedicated commitment, and as well to engaging their stakeholders, particularly other departments. We're crossing departments into sustainability, economics, Chamber of Commerce's, going across to public works or parks, maybe it's community development. And we're also using it really good for updating information, for keeping some of our baseline data more current and more engaged. What Pittsburgh was able to do is they were able to update their tree inventory. So let's dive into a second here and think about why is that important and what would we do with that? Just to be clear, there's two types of inventory updates that can happen. You can do a re-inventory, which is where you basically cache your old data and start from new. So here's a Bell Fountain Cemetery. Interesting enough, I just had the privilege of being here yesterday for a tree keeper workshop, and I shared some of this information with the horticulturists there, and it's pretty exciting to see how since 2007 they've advanced their program a lot. They have since become an level 2 arboretum and have increased their diversity and increased their tree counts, all while maintaining and promoting a healthier urban forest. So we came back 7 years later, and you can see how the levels and the diversity, some of this is because they wanted that level 2 accreditation, which requires a certain amount of tree diversity. Some of this is just because of new planting efforts and over maturing of trees. So you can see here the brown line is the original data, and then the green boxes are the new updated data. Here's the diameter. You can see the level of planting that's happened and the level of removals that have happened along the way. Pretty critical to think about from the future as that 0 to 8 inch category starts to move into the 9 to 17. Projecting out what the budget needs are going to be for that will be really important as they think about staffing and as they think about program funding. The other type of inventory update versus a re-inventory is physically going around and doing an inventory update. This is when you load up the historical tree information and then you revisit each tree and you change the information or update the information associated with that tree. So that's really interesting and really powerful. It's a little bit slower of a process, but the interesting component here is you can do some really cool change analysis. So here we are in Buffalo, New York, where we looked at about 110,000 trees, re-inventoried them, and did an inventory update. And we can look at like the average growth rate of trees. We can look at the performance of trees in certain growth spaces. We looked at the number of trees that were recommended for removal in original inventory and are still standing. Looking at the trees that were in poor condition but changed to fair condition because of some pruning or some coming out of a drought or something like that. Looking at the tree failures, what trees had the highest propensity to fail. It's really exciting and it's really cool to think about how that inventory updating can be utilized. And I think we're just starting, we're just starting to scratch the surface of possibilities there. So that's what those are some of the milestones that I chose to focus on today. I could have picked any of them, but just to recap, we talked about the Tree City USA milestone, talked about the tree inventory milestone, talked about the Urban Forestry Master Plan, and we talked about re-inventories or inventory updates. You could tell stories, and we could talk about how having more people and a dedicated urban forestry program has been able to better and think about it. I think about the city I live in here in Columbia. When I first moved here, we only had 2 certified arborists, and now we have a staff of about 8 certified arborists. And we've been able to, we're almost going to be finishing our urban forestry master plan here in 10 years later. And that's really exciting to think about how the people have driven that completely. They haven't gotten any more money, but just by reaching out and by getting more staff engaged and certified, that's been able to get them a tree inventory. They've been able to get some public relations going, and then they were able to get some more money allocated towards the master plan process. And they're in the process right now of thinking about doing a re-inventory as well. But what is this missing? Obviously I said at the beginning that this is a customizable continuum sheet here. What's some things that are missing from it? Some examples that are missing. I think you could throw a storm response plan in here somewhere. Maybe that's a subcategory of a funded program. Maybe that's its own milestone all together. I was down in Florida in February and talking at a storm response conference there, and I could see communities and utilities there thinking more and more about that. Maybe you need to create some sort of allied nonprofit like a Tree Pittsburgh or a Tree Baltimore or a Tree People in Austin, thinking about an ability to help leverage money and leverage volunteers. Maybe that can help you raise money to do a tree inventory. That's what Tree Des Moines was able to do up in Des Moines, Iowa. The city there had been struggling forever to get a tree inventory going. So with their nonprofit Tree Des Moines, they were able to fundraise and get some grants and get some competitive cost share with the city itself. The city said, hey, we'll give you $100,000 if you can raise $100,000. And they were able to do it, and they were able to get a tree inventory. So I think identifying if you need one of those. Maybe it's getting something like SMA, Society of Municipal Arborists Accreditation. There's about a dozen or so of these communities out there. Maybe that's a long-term goal. Maybe that's beyond a master plan. It's going through that process of proving against your peers. Or maybe it's creating a really cool public education outreach program. A lot of cities have done this throughout the years. We've done things like hanging tree price tags. We've done little skits with people getting dressed up as Smokey the Bear, or, we've done tree pruning and climbing. We just had a cool one wrap up in Cincinnati area called Kentucky Roots. But one of my favorite ones that's happening right now is in Denver, Colorado, and it's called Be a Smartash. So I'm going to show you this little YouTube video right here, if it works, of course.
Hey, did you know that 1 in 6 trees in Denver is an ash tree? And all of those trees can disappear thanks to a pesky insect called the emerald ash borer. But you can stop that from happening by logging on to beasmartash.org and using My Tree Keeper. All you have to do is enter your address. Then click the filter button. Next, click the ash tree icon to see if you have an ash tree on your property. Ash trees appear as yellow triangles. Now you can click to learn more about your tree. Finally, if you do have an ash tree on your property, go to beasmartash.org and click What Can I Do to learn more about how to save your ash. Together, we can stop the emerald ash borer from destroying Denver's urban canopy.
Yay! So that's a cool YouTube video, and here's an example, and anybody can go to this. This is an example of how Denver is using their tree inventory to create a public education campaign to help engage community members for emerald ash borer. They have this, their My Tree Keeper version up here, demonstrating clearly the $23.5 million in benefits that all of their trees are producing. And, that's publicly available, so anybody can zoom in, they can search by their address, or they can click on a simple dot, and it'll pull up what information is available that you want them to see there. So here we can see this is a private ash tree that they've added to the list, and you can see the Google Street View there on the bottom so that someone can look in and see. And then The interesting thing here is the homeowners can add if they want to get a treatment done or something like that. But this way, at least the city knows, hey, these are where some of the private ash trees are. These are what the potential losses and increase in our canopy are, in ways. It's a really cool engagement process and engagement tool that the city of Denver has embarked on. So that's called Be a Smart Ash. I love it. Well, there's the continuum. It's a resource for you. It's a resource for you to utilize for communicating, to set some goals or some milestones, to maybe help share accomplishments. Think about how you would want to customize it. Think about ways that you would adapt it, and think about that feedback loop there as well. And while you're thinking about the feedback loop in your continuum, I would love your feedback. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on, is this depiction or is this infographic, is this way of thinking in line with the way that you think and the way that you're trying to work in your program? So, quick question just came in. How was Colorado and Denver able to identify the ash trees on private property? I'm not 100% sure, but I know they've done a combination of through education and through outreach of helping community members understand how to identify a tree, and then they can report that they have an ash tree, and somebody will actually come out and view it. They also have a way that the city staff, or as they're out inspecting and as they're out doing their job, if they notice an ash tree, they're adding it to the inventory as well. One thing that Milwaukee did, which was really cool, is they used a technology called hyperspectral imagery, which can identify the species level of the tree canopy to pull out all the ash trees in their city. And then they actually sent mailers to homeowners saying, hey, did you know you have an ash tree? This is your options with an ash tree. You can either treat it or you can remove it. If you remove it, these are the options. If you treat it, these are your options. So a little bit crazy, but pretty cool. Another question just came in. What are the differences between the two types of inventory and costs? It takes a little bit longer. That's hard to answer. It depends on the quality of the original data, and it also depends on what information you want updated. In Kansas City, Missouri, a couple years ago, we updated all of their ash tree inventories before an EAB treatment program. And that was a little bit difficult because we had to go all around the city. The information was from different years, but if it's a pretty clean data set, it can go really quick, like Buffalo. If it's a complicated, convoluted, it can take a little bit longer. One thing I would think about is how important is the addressing information to you. If it's not very important because you do things more GIS-based, more GIS-centric, that can save you a lot of money. If you have to clean up addressing, that can be a lot of time, and that might not be the best use of the money. And then, what type, let's see here, what is another question? What type of budget does a city need to keep their program moving forward? That's an interesting question. And I think that, there is no silver bullet answer. We all know that the Arbor Day's recommendation for Tree City USA of $2 per capita is nowhere near enough. The average across the country is somewhere between $5 to $7 per person is what is average being spent. And I would bet that if you ask the average person, they would say that's not enough. So I would think about it on a per capita basis. Probably need to be somewhere around like closer to $10 per person. I think about leveraging these different milestones to get different funding levels. Sometimes like doing a tree inventory might just be a project that you need a grant for. Dedicated staff, that's something you need a lot of support for. You can't offset that with contract foresters, but thinking about the difference between a project and a programmatic cost, and then how you can leverage that and get that. So some things can be one-time costs, some things are ongoing farther. Oh, here's an interesting idea. How many participants tree ordinances have specific citations to protect private trees? I guess I could have asked that poll question, But how about if I ask that in a follow-up survey that I'll be sending to everybody? So I'll send a follow-up survey to everybody with just some general questions about how you like the webinar, if you need any additional information. And I'll go ahead and include that as there as well, and then I can share the results of that as well. But my hunch is not very many. A lot of ordinances protect their trees, the public trees. A lot of ordinances have a nuisance clause, which allows you to remove trees if it's a hazardous or a nuisance to the public or other private property. But certain parts of our makeup don't like infringement on private property. But there are examples. City of Atlanta, they have a recompense fund for trees over 6 inches. Massachusetts, you have to flag, if you're going to remove a tree, you have to flag it for everybody and have a public meeting on it. Lots of communities do have some sort of tree preservation during development. Usually it's around heritage trees or certain larger trees. It could be canopy. I do think that's a growing trend and what more and more people are comfortable with doing and passing. I have definitely seen that trend happening. But we've also seen the trend in Texas where the governor there is trying to make it illegal to create tree preservation ordinances. So it's important to keep our fight up and keep our story going. All right, any other questions to roll up here? Again, I want to protect your time. Those of you that know me know I can talk a lot, so I don't want to keep you. Some are done with lunch, some are waiting to eat lunch, and some are getting ready to, or starving because this is their lunch. So, all right. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and close her down. If you have any other questions, this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm always here for you. We're always here for you. And I look forward to hearing your success stories and hearing how you've been able to advance your program along the continuum. So thanks. I hope everybody has a great day.